Hello everyone, welcome back. This is my first video of 2025. New year, new overlays, but the same old guests. But the same old guests with good reason, because ChrisTFer joins me again as the head coach of the Ultimates, a new organisation entering EMEA, and quite the roster they've constructed. But before we get on to that, Chris, I kind of want to ask you, how was the off-season for you, right? Because end of last year, SSG ends, and you're all out of contract. What happens next?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it was pretty good. Like, one thing that notoriously happens in Overwatch off seasons is they often tend to being pretty long, right? So if you, like in Overwatch League, if you had an off season and you were still on the contract, off season was just the greatest time in the fucking world because you just got paid and you did nothing for 4 months. Unfortunately, it's no longer Overwatch League. So off season, the 4 months, doing nothing for 4 months is okay, but not getting paid for it, that's just being unemployed. So when in Stockholm, everything got announced that we were going to be starting in January, I think everyone kind of realized that it's going to be pretty good for most people because everyone's going to kind of get employed again quite quickly. So things started pretty quickly. I think for most teams, the big deadline is just like partnership stuff. Like I think most teams were ready to pull the trigger, but they needed to see what Blizzard was doing. And I think one maybe advantage TU is going to have is like, they aren't necessarily motivated by the partnership program in terms of like they weren't necessarily only going to sign a roster if they got in. So they were ready to do things quite quickly. So actually it went pretty quickly within you had like every org under the world was talking to me. And then most of them was, yeah, we're just not doing Overwatch. There was a time I had like 7 orgs on the go and I was like, oh, I'm the fucking man. And then quite like 5 of them dropped within a week, But yeah, overall, it was actually say it's about as smooth as an off season as you can get, really.
And then there was a lot of interest when the sort of SSG, the old London core, sort of announced they're probably not staying together. Were there certain parts, because this roster you've actually got is very different from all of that. You've got a couple of players you've worked with before, like KSA a bit last year, Skai a bit in Overwatch League, but it's very different from a London core. Was that an intentional choice, or was it just how the pieces settled?
It wasn't super intentional. I think maybe everyone on that SSG team felt to a degree that they wanted to do something slightly different. Like I think that when you've been together for 3 years, I think after a certain amount of time, it does kind of run its course. So I think for me, there was like an element in the back of my head of that I wanted to try something new, like coach players I hadn't coached before. But at the same time, I was also like really happy to coach most of the guys again, Like I think like me coaching TM was at certain points like a real possibility too. So I didn't necessarily like avoid like the same players, but I was also like in my head, I was like 3 years, I'm kind of like ready to try like a different group,
Because this roster as well seems to have very different strengths than the roster you've worked with for the last 3 years. Like everyone always talks London, SSG, the Brawl team, the Macro team, everything like this. Now it seems to be a team with maybe a few more star players in the form of like Kev, even KSA, people like Twilight. So back when we were on London, I remember the very first PowerPoint you presented us all with, you talked about our unique strength. Our advantage was we could have the best communication in Overwatch League, and it sort of became our identity. And I think a lot of that probably carried on into SSG. With this roster, what's the sort of identity you see when you see this group of players?
Yeah, so I did a lot of, maybe soul searching isn't the right word, but I did like a huge amount of analysis of basically everything that we've ever coached. I went through like a lot of London games. I went through everything that we did in the last year. And I think I came to like a few conclusions. And I think that maybe we can potentially talk about it more, but it's like, I think somewhere what I realized was that like, when we want to talk about like competing internationally, the mindset is that the West just needs to do the West and then roll a good meta. That's effectively what me and you created by doing London, right? Yeah. And then what I kind of realized was that like that was maybe slightly wrong. One thing that I started to realize was like the difference between loser picks format and pre-selected maps is massive, actually way bigger than people give it credit for. Because you remember when we were in London, we used to write all the maps on the whiteboard. Yeah. And you basically like, yeah, this one's a bit fucked. Like, it was against a decent team, but it's like, some of those maps are really bad. And inevitably they were always lost. And then you maybe had like the series like against Toronto or against like Gladiators where it's like, oh, Lijiang Kings Row Circuit. Oh, that seems like, thank you, Blizzard. And what loser picks does is it basically guarantees that every map pool is a bad one, right? Because unless you're drafting against a really dumb Korean coach, I mean, to be fair, on
You
one
might get a chance.
Yeah. They're almost certainly going to pick the bad map. So what I did with this team, my main focus was I really don't want to have these like maps where our odds of winning are just 5%. Like these maps where it's just fucked. Like I really, really felt like the way that Toronto were able to be quite successful was just through flexibility. The way Florida before them were like flexibility. And I think that like, there was almost like, in my opinion, if you want to compete internationally, there is a barrier to entry of which you can't just only be able to play one thing, because you're just going to, especially in the hero bans, right? Because guess what? I'm banning your best heroes if you can only play one thing. So I think above all else, what this team's identity is going to be like the flexible EU team, you know, like the one that, you know, doesn't have, hopefully, like super obvious bans or picks where we just have a 5% chance to win.
And then that kind of comes on a little bit to, obviously you've imported 2 players as well, and you put them both in the same role as well. You've gone for Twilight and you've gone for Faith. So you chose to import 2 slots. Why in those 2 spots? Why did you want 2 support players coming in from Korea when there was probably, in reality, quite a lot of options on different roles as well?
Yeah, so I think, in my opinion, for EU, I think most teams shouldn't import DPS, because actually I think we have some really high-level DPS. And I think what every team wanted, including us, was a Korean tank. I think this is the thing that everyone wanted, a Korean tank, you know? But obviously, basic supply and demand says that if everybody wants something, then it becomes quite difficult to get said thing. And basically what started to happen was there was just an insane bidding war. There was something like, there was like Donghak, there was like Kellen, and there was Mag, you know? And eventually, like, it turns out these players are just getting offered by like every team in the world. And I think for us, it was maybe harder to attract them than any Korean team, like if a Korean team, or even just like a team like maybe one of the American teams where there's like, it's a little bit easier to live in America, or maybe you can still play from Korea, whatever it ends up being. So we kind of like looked at it, and I think like the idea of the Korean main tank is obviously good, because what you want is a main tank that can play dive heroes. But what I felt somewhere was that like maybe what I'm hoping is one of the weaknesses that certain EU teams will have is if they have imported heavily towards like the tank side, they maybe like lose out on the supports a little bit, you know? Like I think in theory, like I think there was maybe an argument that like Anna Brig is more important than the Winston in dive. Like maybe it's like a fucking crazy take. But I feel somewhere that actually, if you want to play dive, if you have a really insane backline, like I felt, by the way, when Atlanta were insane at Winston and a break, I think it was their backline that was the difference between them. That's it. Like, and I think if we look at Crazy Raccoons, what's the difference now? I think so I think somewhere, if you can find one of the main tanks that can play dive heroes, which is basically like, I guess like Hadi and Chase Torch, I think now you're in a situation where actually you might actually be a better dive team because of having like a strong backline. And obviously for us, Skai is the best Ana player in Europe anyway. So whatever kind of happens with this, we actually have like really, really solid options for. So I think that's where I felt like I really wanted Faith. Like Faith was like actually the guy that was like, he was what I really, really wanted. Because, you know, if we do Koreans, I always want them to be westernized a little bit, like they speak English. So I think we got like 2 Korean players that have both played for a long time in mixed teams with good English. And I think I already, from like a few days of scrims, I'm like, yeah, I think this was a good decision.
What put Faith really top of your radar as well? Because even though we had success, especially in maybe season 6 with Vancouver Titans was probably like a high point in his career. But the year just gone, he found himself outside the upper echelons of the Korean teams, just playing for the bottom end teams, having a really sort of poor season of results.
So I always used to say this. When we played against that Vancouver team, I actually thought Faith was the best player on that team. So I actually like Faith is like really up in my expectations. And I have this kind of like prediction, this like feeling somewhere that it's possible Lucio is a much less important hero than he's ever been before. I think if you look at like the Junior Brig backline and then the Ana Brig backline, I think there is maybe an argument for where the state of Overwatch is right now. If you had to put like your eggs into like a Brig specialist or a Lucio specialist, I think it might actually be fine to do. Like Brig might be more value across a season than Lucio. So I think for me, getting a really good Brig player was the priority. And then obviously, like everything that came with Faith, like experience, I think even his Lucio is like definitely going to be high enough level that it's not going to be a problem. And I think he kind of like really, really fitted the hero pool that we needed and had everything on the side that you would also maybe want from an import. And Faith was super keen.
Oh, really?
The Faith deal was so quick. Like, it was unbelievable. Like, he was like, yeah, okay, he's in like 2 hours later. So yeah, he was actually the player that I was really, really like, out of all the imports, Faith was the one that I really wanted.
So the implication is Faith maybe almost came first and then Twilight a little bit later? Because Twilight
I think it was like the opposite, actually. I think Twilight was another one who was obviously like, was just waiting to see what was happening with Korea. And then, yeah, we were able to, like, I think a lot of teams are now looking at like Korean flex supports. I don't know, I can't remember who's been announced at this time, but I think there's going to be like quite a few Korean flex supports in Europe. But I think Twilight, again, it was like, Twilight's obviously like, there was like a gamble element of like, he has the highest ceiling, like the level that he actually played at, he was like actually like the best or like maybe the second best behind Shu Anna in the world. But he's obviously been out of it for a while. But again, I actually know Twilight like decently well from the time in the Overwatch League and stuff. And I know like his English again is fine. Whereas I think like if you got like, I don't know, like if you got like an 18-year-old new gen Korean, the odds are they just have like zero English. And then if you put them into a gaming house on their own somewhere in Europe, then maybe there is this factor of like what TM went through last year, where like your Koreans, you're going to have to cycle them because they're only able to like handle one stage before they want to go back to Korea. Whereas I'm hopeful we'll see that like the way that we've kind of they get like a contract out of them. You know?
It sounds like as well, does this mean they're going to be in some kind of team house or some kind of place with the Ultimates in Saudi Arabia or something like that?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think Twilight needs a few weeks to sort some stuff out in Korea, but Faith's already there.
Okay. And would that be just for the Koreans, or is it the sort of thing that the whole team will use at some point? Or
I expect we'll do boot camps. I don't know if we'll do Korean boot camps or Saudi boot camps. I mean, the Korean boot camp is probably better because it also allows our Koreans to go home for a few weeks, which I think maybe feels really good for them. But we do have like a facility in Saudi, maybe EWC if we get there and stuff like that.
And then rest of the roster feels like pretty straightforward choices almost in terms of Kev and Kai, an established duo. Maybe the one question that even when you were announced, there was a lot of conversation about when we see a year like we just have, where we've seen so much double flex DPS in so many metas, and it'd be a real sort of sticking point for some teams if they don't have a player who can do that. Obviously, Kev can play everything, but Kai has really only got the top level on the hit scan, and you've got no room left on the roster now because we're in roster limit 7. Do you worry this is going to be a problem? That maybe even in a hero ban meta or something, that Kai's going to maybe get like targeted and bullied a bit?
Yeah, so I actually kind of gambled the opposite way. Was I felt that in hero bans, a hit scan player is more valuable because if you just have like one thing about double flex comps, I think usually is they're like, you need to study them a lot. Like the Amalgamator at the end, it takes a lot of time to be able to play like this. Like you always need to play like a high tempo style and stuff like that. Whereas I think what's really good about hit scan is if you ban Sojourn, I'll play Ash or Widow. Like actually, like it's a hit scan ban is almost impossible to ban out because the heroes effectively operate the same way. So I actually felt like Kev Kai, we'll see. Maybe we'll learn to regret this. I think they're pretty much unbannable. Like I think that there's like nothing that you're going to hit us with on a DPS ban, which is going to cause us a problem. Whereas I think maybe with other roles, there is more impactful bans. So for me, I think any team that has like a good flex and a good hit scan, I think you'll be fine. Like even at the last meta, it's not. I don't think hit scan was necessarily terrible. You know, you saw TM have like a lot of success with it to the point where they force teams to also play them on hit scan. You know, so and I think especially as every comp is less studied because every comp is like, oh, if they ban this, we need to play something slightly different. You're always playing slightly different comps. Hit scan is so nice because you know how to play hit scan. Just hit there and shoot them in the fucking head.
Shoot them in the head.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I want to ask about the tank line as well, because I think KSA kind of speaks for himself, an established talent, very good at a lot of the heroes. I don't think there's many surprises that he's ended up on one of the top teams. But Chase Torch is the person coming in. So even though it feels like a perfect fit in terms of hero pool wise, Chase is a player who's come with pretty high expectations, maybe at the start of last year when he had that sort of pop-off stage with X Oblivion. But then has sort of found himself just in roster limbo for all of that and never really living up to any of that sort of potential that saw early on. So how confident are you that you can get the sort of Chase that was promised at the start out of him this year?
Yeah, so I spoke to Chase and I think that he is like in theory like my biggest project this year. You know, like I think he's the one that maybe one thing that you would notice about our team is we might have upped the average age. Like we might have said how old it was last year and then made it older. So in terms of like next up European young talent, I think Chase Torch is probably at the highest. Like I think he would have played more last year if he was actually able to travel to LANs, and he should be able to travel to LANs this year, I think. I mean, I've heard that before, but I'm pretty sure actually we're good this time.
This time for real.
Yeah. So I think he being one of maybe like 2 European players that can play the dive tanks at a high level. And B, maybe somewhere he's like the uncapped potential. I think like within this team, like if we are to really excel and to go on, like I think maximizing, like turning Chase into what Infected was for NA last year, I think it's like my biggest goal. So I suspect that like I'll be doing like a lot of like one-on-one stuff with him, because I think he's like the X factor. Like KSA, you know what you're gonna get. You're gonna get a really, really high level on the heroes that KSA is good at. But with Chase, if we can really unlock him, then I think actually that's where our lineup really starts to shine.
And then the question I feel like almost compelled to ask, this feels like the final test this time. If you can't win on dive maps, is it finally time to pull the plug on on that composition? Because this roster and this lineup.
I mean, with this lineup, if we're not winning dive in Europe, I'm just retiring. Like it actually is unironically me that's the problem, Like I've been coping. It's not me, I can go Jim. But if we don't, then for sure it's not me. We already scrimmed a little bit, and I already kind of I'm like, yeah, okay, like there's like a.
You've got it.
Yeah, I really like it. Like I think there's like a lot of really, really good decision making, like on an individual level, and then just need to just add some fundamentals. And I actually think, ironically, like I'm not going to coach too much of it. I think that's maybe the mistake I made in diving. I overcoach it. I think some way you kind of just have to let it be, like set everyone up the right way, the basic rules, and let them go. There's too many like dynamic decision making to coach it the same way that we coach the other metas. So I think we'll play dive, we'll fix some stuff, but I'm largely just gonna let the players play and hope that they carry us to victory.
Well, with the Twilight Faith backline, it seems like they should know what they're doing, right?
I really hope so.
You hope so?
I really hope so. I swear, if they've got like 12 deaths every dive map, like I've had for the last 3 years, I'm so cooked, like it's genuinely on me.
It's all right. You'll be all right. Yeah. It means you want Ilios over map pool now as well, right?
It does. That's why
everything turns around. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about the upcoming season, because we've seen some format changes, some structure changes. Maybe the first thing that your team is going to have to go through is that you're going to have to go through the Swiss stage, through the Open Qualifier to get yourself into the top 8. So yeah, obviously, no one's surprised to see you're absolutely pumped about that. But I know we've not had all the rosters announced yet, but the EMEA region is actually looking pretty stacked in terms of the depth and strength of teams. So go on.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we start to look at there's going to be like the teams that maybe should be at the top. I think there's like now like 5 or 6 teams with enough talent where they can compete in the right meta. I think that one thing that's happened this season, and I don't think this is too like leaky, but like almost every team has 2 Koreans, like almost everybody is like using imports. And that's not just the partner teams, like I don't know, like NA, I don't know much about NA, but I know even those like top 2 or 3 NA teams also are just maximizing import slots. And that's the same in Europe. So I think what that does is it means the good players, you can kind of spread, like they don't all congregate to the top, because like you can I get 3 good European players and then I fill it out. So I think on paper, Europe looks like really competitive this year, which combined with the fact that only 2 of us go to LAN is going to make, actually, I think the regular season is going to be actually pretty exciting in Europe.
Yeah, I think even the whole regular season, because we do, I think, is it 6 weeks of regular season into a regional playoffs of the top 6. Imagine you hopefully you can get top 6, and that should be okay. But even the Swiss and everything, I think is actually going to be super competitive to who fills out in that top 8, because all of a sudden, a lot of the teams that we maybe used to seeing last year, like your Ex-Oblivions, your Peps, even your SR Peak Checks, there's not a lot of spots for them, really, if all the teams expected to qualify do qualify. So it's going to become, I think, like a real dogfight in the region.
No, I agree. Even Peps, all of a sudden, like their DPS lineup, you think, oh shit, like even this, like there's a lot of excitement behind it. I think one thing that EU has to its positivity is, I mean, we have like a lot of like Saudi Arabian organizations that are willing to invest money, like kind of for SEL, but maybe just in general. Whereas I think like in NA, you're only going to get investments from partner teams. And I think that's exactly what I said. I mean, like Al Qadidsa, or whatever, however you say it, you know, like yeah, that's it. Like they announced it, and all of a sudden you're like, fuck, like they really have like some strong imports here. And all of a sudden that's a roster where it's like this team, like on paper, could be good too. So I agree. I think Swiss is actually going to be like, unironically, like a test. I mean, we should be able to get top 6, I'm hoping, unless I really fuck up the draft. But actually, I think there's a lot of like fun games this weekend too.
And then I want to ask, because as well as importing players, a lot of teams have been importing coaches as well. The Korean players not stopping at coming over and filling all these spots. There's also been a huge import of Korean coaches. Krusty, Junkbuck, the Falcons coaches have come here on separate teams. Krusty announced on Gen G, Junkbuck announced on El Qadisiyah, and even I think there's lots of rumours as well that Smash will be returning as well in some form as well. So all of a sudden, the level of coaching in EMEA compared to last year, where you had Goomba for a little bit, and then you had no one for a while.
It was just me.
It was just you. All of a sudden, there's a lot of rivalry and a lot of competition. So how do you feel about like the level? The stakes are higher now.
No, I mean, no, I really look forward to it. You know, I think that I'm quite happy to compete against the coaches. The only, like, you know, you might have noticed about me, I got a bit of an ego. You might have noticed that once or twice. So being the only coach in the region, there's nothing to me to game. I can't coach gap anyone, but now I get to fight against the big dogs, you know. It was funny, like there was a time, I don't know what TM's going to do with their coach, but there was a time when maybe they were also going to go like Korean coach, maybe they still are. It was just me and the fucking Koreans, and I knew these guys were going to make a group chat and just blacklist me or something. You know, they were going to get me in some way. But actually, yeah, like Junkbuck is obviously like, I think one of, if not like the best coach in the world. Like Krusty is about as successful as any coach who's ever been there. So it's quite nice to compete against them more regularly. And I think especially when it comes to like a hero ban meta, where I think like coaching decisions in terms of that are really important, I think it's also quite fun.
When we talk about Korea as well, we often talk about the reason the Korean teams are able to stay so good and stay so far ahead is they just sit in Korea, scrimming each other all the time. They have a really high level of practice consistently. Do you think there's an argument here that actually, with all these top teams in EMEA, there's a better practice environment more consistently for everyone, that everyone will level each other up essentially and make the whole region stronger?
Yeah, I think that would be the hope. I think obviously one thing that we maybe spoke about is that like it kind of worked against us last year in EU, where like NA just kind of like got all their players in the top 2 teams and they grew. But I think like in theory, like last year, there was a lot of times where if you weren't scrimming Ents and TM were in one of their like mental boom cycles, you actually only had like, we would scrim Ents like once or twice a day, you know? Whereas at least for now, until like the power rankings like shit, it looks like you can really get like 4 or 5 pretty decent scrim partners, which I think is really, really good. That's one of the best things about the Korean bootcamp is you play a different team every day and they're always good. And then there's something that they show you. And I think because like there was a lot more money in EU or just in Overwatch in general than there was last year. So I think the level of seriousness is also going to be higher, you know? I think you're going to see teams that have prepped for everything. Everyone now has an established coach. So everybody is going to be like improving at a pretty decent rate. Which obviously is scary because it means there's a real chance that you don't qualify for LAN. But I think in the long run, it's pretty good.
I want to ask about that as well, because obviously they've changed the qualification process. So rather than doing 2 stages and taking your circuit points from those 2 stages, it's just direct qualification. And that means for the first tournament, at least, there's only 2 spots, which means it's going to be super competitive. But what I feel also with this as a potential problem is last year we would often just get hit with a balance patch whenever it came out in the main game. And this would cause you some problems because you'd get it sometimes midway through qualification, midway through the season, and then you'd maybe have to play your knockout tournament on it. But last year you had 2 stages, right? So there's an element of like, oh, do we really get super unlucky with the patch 2 times in a row? Whereas now there could be 1 patch that is absolutely pivotal because it comes out 2 weeks before qualification tournament.
It'll happen for sure. I think, again, that's maybe hopefully where like our roster building is patch proof. I'm thinking, I'm hoping, I'm praying. maybe one thing that SSG wasn't was patch proof. You know, like when we lost like the Mauga meta like 2 days before stage 1, that really, really hurt us because that was like a meta where we could excel on, and then it just went to one where we couldn't excel on. So yeah, I don't know. It will be a factor. I mean, I think I actually have to qualify for the first LAN, or it's likely also a divorce as well as potentially losing my job. So it's like there's a lot of stakes on me to get to China. But yeah, I mean, yeah, there's like the thing is like in double limb, there's always going to be some upset, you know. Like there's going to be like I think everyone maybe looks at us and TM as like the top 2 teams in the region on paper, which I think makes sense. But for sure, one of us is going to miss out on at least one LAN, you know. Like it
comes down to the day, doesn't it? So much now.
Yeah.
You think about it as well. It happened to because Korea had this system last year essentially, and it happened to Zeta Division. They don't qualify for either Dallas or Stockholm because they lose 2 map 5s, and they don't get to go. They only get to go to 1 international event out of 3 because of that.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll have to see.
And then I wanted to ask about hero bans as well, because obviously we experienced it at the Esports World Cup last year, but there's been one key change to or maybe 2 changes, one of them more important than the others, and that is that the hero ban is now selected after your roster is submitted. So we saw teams last year like Toronto who have 5 players who have a lot of flexibility, and it's the same roster no matter what comp they're playing. Your roster also has a lot of flexibility, but it's spread out across the roster a lot more, so you're going to need to substitute. But now it means with this system, you could potentially be target banned a lot more. Like, oh, Twilight's in, no Anna for you. Chase is in, no Winston for you. Are you worried that now because you've got flexibility across a bigger roster, this change in the format is going to hurt your team?
Yeah, I think it does hurt us slightly. I think, to be fair, I think it would have really hurt us on SSG. So I'm kind of glad at this moment that they changed it as opposed to last year. I feel like from a competitive point of view, I do think it's better the other way around. But I'm aware that like this adds more time between maps. And that's maybe one thing that like the only problem everyone had with EWC was it took too long between maps. Like even when I was rewatching the EWC VODs, it's like, fuck, it is 10 minutes between every map. And I feel like the fact that you just like both teams do this and then you just do bans, they're going to save like a few minutes across every single, like you could at LAN, you could start setting the players up whilst you do the draft. And all of a sudden there is just this ability to overlap. So I think a roster like ours, it slightly favors us the other way. But even with someone like Chase or Twilight, it's not like these guys are one tricks, right? Like, for sure there is going to be like bans that will hurt us, but I don't think it's going to. Well, I'm hoping it's not going to be like a big problem.
And then one of the other significant changes we've seen is the map pool change, where the map pool has gotten smaller, but they've also combined some of the modes. So I think it's now Hybrid and Flashpoint are now combined into one mode, which means if you pick a Flashpoint, you've essentially blocked the other team getting a Hybrid as well. And there's only going to be, I don't know what we'd call them, but 4 groupings of modes, essentially, which means on map 5, you get to pick from everything again. Do you feel this is a change that benefits you or hurts you, or...?
I think, in theory, being able to play Escort twice should favour the team that has the most dive, especially when they inevitably put Ilias back into the pool, because I think that allows you to guarantee 3 dive maps out of the 5, which I think is basically all you need to win a tournament, is just to be the best dive team. I felt a lot of the conversations about map pool in general was like, I saw a lot of people saying, oh, we need to make it smaller, we need to make it smaller. I never really understood why. Like, in hero bans, even with this map pool, you're never going to have a strategy on every single map because it's different comps every single time. Like the age of having everything mapped out, it can't exist anymore. So I think the difference between having like a smaller or bigger map pool, but to be honest, I think the change is whatever, you know, or at least I haven't like figured out a way that I can cope about why it's like holding me back yet. Like I think it seems fine, you know. Like I think. On paper, maybe it slightly favors non-brawl teams because I think what brawl teams really liked was having like Clash, Flashpoint guaranteed, and then like being able to play push. Whereas now, maybe you lose one of them. Like if you like take Numbani first, either way on Escort you're fucked because they like Escort, and then But I don't know. I think at the end of the day, you're splitting hairs a little bit.
It depends exactly what maps are in the pool anyway, because you can make an argument, or sometimes there's actually nicer Escort maps to block than there is, you know, in terms of there's actually some Escort maps like a Circuit Royale or something. You can actually really get away with playing
in this
Brawl
pool,
on.
right?
Yeah. But then, like on hybrid, it's maybe a little bit trickier to find those really good brawl maps all the time or something. So maybe having Flashpoint means you can actually block a lot of those harder maps as well. I don't know. Well, I guess it's one of those things when once it starts to play out and teams start to go through the loser picks, you start to figure out, oh, okay, this actually causes X, Y, and Z problem across the series. And then, where are we? Sorry. So yeah, so then you're gonna play this weekend or starting Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday for the Swiss. What are the expectations? Everything going to be okay? We'll see you in top 8.
Yeah, should do. I think it's like there is hero bans in the Swiss on the Saturday and Sunday, which is quite nice. So just got to kind of get through the first day. I think we need to get like top 16 in the first 2 days of Swiss without hero bans. But I honestly think we've got a top 16 roster in it. So
got enough imports for that top 16.
Yeah, I really think that the Koreans are going to get us into the top 16. And so even the top 16 is the top 16 minus the partner teams. So it's like the top 19. But yeah, I don't know. I think we should be okay. I'm quite looking forward to the. I don't know why. I don't know. I think because everything's so new in terms of the team and the format. I think it's just quite exciting. I think what I felt was at EWC, the more actual officials you played, the more you kind of like realized how the format needed to go, and what like how your thought process needs to go. So I think actually playing a Swiss is always good, and I think just in general this week, I think it'll be quite fun.
Have they told you as well? So let's presume you get through the Swiss, you get through the double limb, you get to your top 8. Have they told you how seeding will work once you go into that? Or I guess does it not really matter because you play a round robin? I don't know if there's going to be an inherent advantage for the partner teams in like because somebody has to pick first map, right?
Yeah,
so
but
I don't know if partner teams get preferred seed or not.
Yeah, especially when like Ilios is in the pool, that seed is actually really, really significant. There's loads of stuff in the rules which is just like we'll tell you later. Like actually beyond this weekend's tournament, I don't really know how even the regular season. I don't really know how it's gonna like fully work in terms of all of that. I guess because it's a league system, they could just do like effective home and away where you get like 5 games as the first seed and 5 games as the second seed, and then everybody gets the same amount. But I don't know. It is what it is. I think the only thing is, actually the COF pool as of right now, especially as like COF is like mandatory for map 1, which I think it still is, right? It's actually pretty irrelevant. Like the difference between like Lijiang, Nepal, and Samoa isn't anywhere near as significant as it could be if like a Busan or an Ilios was in the pool. So I think it is what it is.
Okay, then last one for you. Obviously, new organisation. Do you have a message for the fans or anyone maybe looking to support your team this season?
Yeah, I don't know. I just think that obviously we have about as an experienced roster as possible. So you should kind of hopefully know what you're getting if you like us or if you don't like us. I'll try to win on dive this year, at least once or twice. No guarantees, but I'm going to really try. But no, I think we'll do our best to make the lands, and then hopefully I don't get divorced.
Beautiful. Good luck.